Recording underway, and over to you both. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for having us. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm very pleased to be invited. So we are talking to you today about some research that we're just currently beginning, and we're very, very interested in gaining your professional kind of thoughts and opinions on where we're going and where we've started from. So we are going to talk about sustainable livelihoods, and it'll be very unacademic of us not to give you quite a long, boring introduction about the context of where we're coming from. In saying that, there was a report out today by the Sustainable Business Network that I thought was pretty good timing, which found that sustainability was a key focus for almost all of the organisations that they interviewed, though of course seconds to profit. This network conducted 30 interviews with organisations that had an annual turnover over 50 million, so fairly big companies. The results showed that shifts to sustainability were the result of market pressure and regulation, especially for organisations who were exporting to Europe. And we've seen the Paris Agreement, a lot of regulations within the EU, a lot more efforts to be sustainable than certainly we are, and a lot of prioritise of action around reducing emissions. So new regulations then become mandatory for these big companies to report on climate risk and having an impact. But at the same time, customers' expectation was another factor driving businesses to action on climate change and sustainability. Some businesses also saw this as having a competitive advantage, while others had also noticed, and this is probably the area that you guys will be able to help us most on, an increase in job seekers wanting to work for purpose-driven companies. Next slide, please. So we see this word, well, we certainly see it in the academic sort of space, that this idea of the age of the Anthropocene, and the word anthropo is humans and scene is new. So it's a word that was coined in the 1980s, but really became popular in 2000 by two scientists, and they argued that we're living in this new geological kind of period in time. So at the age of the Anthropocene is about where human beings have now become the central drivers of dangerous changes to the Earth's biosphere. We're now the single most influential species on the planet, and we're causing significant global warming, you know all this stuff, and other changes to land environment, water, organisms, and the atmosphere. Through human activities, we're having the greatest impacts on carbon and methane in the Earth's atmosphere to date. Our greenhouse gas emissions are rising, causing temperatures and sea levels to rise and get warmer. Air quality in cities is diminishing, and the quantity of plastic is now equal to the total biomass of animals on Earth. It's estimated that up to 1.2 billion, I saw the new figure today, could be displaced by natural hazards by 2050. Industrialization, which is now sort of 300 plus years old, has created manufacturing and production on really unprecedented scales. And coupled with globalization, we've just got these ever increasing markets and economic sectors. So the sectors that rely on extractive industries and labor intensive production especially have created wealth concentration, increasing inequalities and precarity, the exploitation of human beings, and of course devastation for our planet. Next slide, please. So Anna Maria Di Fabio, who's at the University of Florence, who we've started to do quite a lot of work with, and her colleague Jacobus Marie, have sort of argued that radical intervention is now needed to ensure that future generations not only survive but flourish, and are able to express themselves meaningfully through decent work. So many agree that radical intervention is needed, but to what end? Like, where are we actually going? And this is a question that hopefully we are able to start to answer. Next slide, please. Along this journey, career practitioners will be crucial partners in this radical intervention, supporting transitions from school to employment and in counselling and advice around retraining and people reworking in the labour market. So there's going to be new skill acquisitions needed in the green economy, and I'll talk about that in another couple of slides, which works to ultimately benefit society, which in turn hopefully has a better outcome for our planet. We're thinking and sort of seeing that there's increasingly psychological needs that have been met through work, greater self-determination and employment choices that will be becoming much more vital, and vocational practitioners such as yourselves will be vital and ideal chaperones along the pathway to identify and help people transition into the skill development and transitions into meaningful and fulfilling employment in just ways. There's a lot of talk around just transitions as well. Next slide, please. We know that young people often report difficulties in making the school to work transition. The World Economic Forum have produced their latest white paper on the jobs of tomorrow that maybe many of you have already seen. And in this paper, they talk about generative AI and the expectations that this is going to cause and shift in global economies and the world of work. So coinciding with this massive shift in the world of work, are considerable upheavals in economic, geopolitical, and the transitions needed to green economies, especially pressure from other trading partners. Interesting, the jobs rated highest for potential automation and thus replacement are things like bank tellers, telemarketers, statistical assistants. The jobs with the highest potentials for AI to enhance their work is insurance, engineers, mathematicians, and editors. Work that's likely to stay the same and become unchanged from AI, educational guidance and career counsellors and advisors. That was interesting. Paralegal assistants and home health aides. And of course, there's also going to be new work that's generated by AI, such as AI developers, AI ethics, and governance specialists. We've started to talk a little bit about that at work around the ethics of what AI does. So the OECD focus that we see in this slide around helping people find work is considered primarily from expectations of the employer, and certainly in that first slide that I talked about, again, the role is very much from the employer's side as to what sort of gets privileged. So Stu quite nicely, I think, promotes this as an ethos of the worker in the harness. Our focus swivels to the expectations of the worker. So we're moving from the man or the organisation to the worker or the individual, focusing on the human rather than the harnessing of labour for production. Next slide, please. So our goal then, in the type of research that we are promoting, is to go from precarious jobs into decent work opportunities through the lens of humanitarian work psychology, of which Stuart is one of the founders, into sustainable livelihoods. Next slide, please. So we know that there is a desire for sustainable livelihoods. Quiet quitting has been estimated to involve 50% of the American workforce. So a lot of research is done in the US labour market. And this is the idea that there's this disengaged mode at work, the sort of thing that we might have used to call working to rule. The Great Resignation is a step further, and the mass and voluntary exit from work. And in 2021, over 47 million American workers quit their jobs. It is thought that quiet quitting and the Great Resignation partly results from people seeking meaningfulness in work, and that this connects with the purpose of the organisation or employer. In a world filled with, I think, greater uncertainty and rapid change, work may be progressively seen as a means to fulfil psychological needs sense of belonging, sense of fulfillment, and is a place more than ever that needs to align with personal values and provide existential purpose. So this purpose for existence seems to be increasingly tied up with sustainability and sustainable livelihoods. There's growing evidence, research that indicates that certainly a large number of young people are desiring environmentally sustainable jobs. Recent surveys showed that in the UK, about 57% of young people wanted this, and in the Asia Pacific, 77% of young adults. Research also indicates, I think we kind of forget about our older workers, and they're also highly concerned with environmental sustainability. Climate quitting is a relatively new term, and it's the practice of leaving a job or rejecting the offer of a job because the person thinks that the employer's environmental, social, and governance commitments are not aligned with their own. People most likely to climate quit are younger, and basically anyone in their sort of early 40s or younger than that. Next slide, please. So people care about social and environmental sustainability, and up until now I've been kind of more focusing on the climate. The ONET taxonomy now lists more than 60 occupations which are green. And the idea then of people wanting to work in this green economy is defined as low carbon, resource efficient, and socially inclusive. And one of the biggest green economy movements in the world has outlined 5 principles for a green economy that I think are really useful. One is the well-being principle, which is about all people being able to create and enjoy prosperity. The justice principle, which is about equity within and between generations. The planetary boundaries principle, which is a little bit clunky, but it's around the safeguarding, restoration, and investment in nature. Efficiency and sufficiency, which is around supporting sustainable consumption and production, and that's certainly an area that Stu and I will be looking at next year, and we think it sort of really fits with the sustainable livelihood kind of holds hands. And good governance, that the green economy is guided by integrated, accountable, and resilient institutions. People also care significantly about work that has a social good. The NGO and charities market increased from 288 billion in 2022 to 305 billion in 2023. 1 out of every 10 American workers is employed in NGO, and 25% of American adults volunteer for a charity or an NGO. In New Zealand, we have seen green job boards such as the Do Good Jobs connect people seeking work that makes social and environmental change with NGOs, charities, social enterprises, and other organisations. And I had a look at that board just before I came, and it's kind of, there's mainstream jobs that are caring sort of jobs, and then there's definitely jobs that are much more focused around sort of environmental sustainability. Next slide, please. So the skills required for creating, promoting, or supporting sustainable livelihoods, either directly or indirectly, will be clustered around science, architecture, planning, engineering, technology, agriculture, which would be really important for New Zealand, and environmental justice and systems. So people will need expertise in protecting natural resources, especially around food production, as well as managing new technology such as renewable energy, which may not be as problematic in New Zealand. Skills will be needed for the management of built environments that rely on sustainable systems and infrastructure. And underplaying all of these skills will be skills around environmental justice. So people will need to be capable to operate at the intersections of human rights and environmental protections. And this will need to encompass global awareness of legal, social, economic, cultural, historical factors to ensure that injustice and inequalities are not replicated in the same ways that they have been through industrialization as the world shifts towards sustainable goals and outcomes. And I'll hand over now to you, Stuart.
Kia ora, Veronica, kia ora koutou. Great to be here. Thank you for the the privilege to meet, and hopefully we'll exchange ideas later on and just have a conversation. I'm just, we're pushing this idea of sustainable livelihoods, and we're obliged now to do a little bit of definition. It's, to be honest, it's probably an ancient idea. It's been around for thousands of years. People have always sought a sustainable livelihood, a way of making a living that's going to continue on, offer hope for the future generations, and so on. So although it's a relatively new name, it's an old idea. You only have to look back thousands of years to their ancient farming practices called things like cereal mixing. And this idea was that you would, instead of planting one seed, which we do nowadays in monocropping, and everything relies on that one seed coming through and not getting hit by bugs and droughts and so on, they would do cereal mixing. So they'd plant a whole range of different seeds at the same time. And, if one species got bowled over by a bug or a virus or a drought, another one would surely come through. And so the farming became more sustainable and helped to generate a sustainable livelihood. So we talk to most of our students today at Massey, for example, they're not just doing one thing, they're mixing their cereals and they're doing several things to make their livelihood hopefully more sustainable. The modern etymology of the phrase comes out of rural sustainable development. It was actually the rural sustainable development in so-called developing countries. Hopefully we're all developing countries, but in those days they were called developing countries. There was the UN Commission on the Environment. The so-called Brundtland report called Our Common Future came out in 1989. And in chapter 2, there's a very brief mention of the phrase sustainable livelihoods. And a lot of the focus was on things like, people living in economically poorer economies and growing populations, and how to stop deforestation, because people needed to cook and they didn't have electricity, so they needed wood, so they chopped down trees and that would deforest the land, and they'd lose some inherent sustainability out of that. So it started out in a rural, sustainable, low-income kind of setting. But by the 1990s, it was starting to become clear that the concept was had legs in urban settings where we know most of the world's population now lives, over 50% lives. And people started talking about sustainable livelihoods in urban settings. And then by the 2000s, it was starting to get used in the context of overcoming man-made and natural disasters. Having a sustainable livelihood was like a cushion when the things happened, and having one might help you get out of the turmoil and suffering that they caused more quickly. And so the concept's kind of found its own legs as time has gone on. In the 2010s, we had the concept really, I think, of sustainability, certainly, and sustainable development went kind of global through the Rio conference in Brazil. And out of that came the current round of United Nations UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, the biggest grand plan for human development and sustainability ever concocted, widely consulted, not perfect. No plan ever is, no consultation process ever is, but probably the closest thing that humanity's had to a widely consulted grand plan. And, sustainable livelihoods, well, the word sustainable resonates with that idea of a grand plan. Sam, can we have the next slide, please? Thanks. So I thought we'd do a little bit of a definition here. This definition is one that's found in a lot of places, a lot of different disciplines, actually. And if you look at the livelihood definition there from Chambers and Conway, I'm not going to read it out word for word, but for me, what it highlights is that you need something, when you're thinking about people earning a livelihood, making a living, you need some broad house concept that can deal with the fact that people need a cushion against stress and shocks. We had the pandemic, we've had the cost of living crisis, the war in Ukraine, all the things that have come and that are continue to come as crises for the world and stresses and shocks for so many people. So there's this whole idea that a livelihood becomes sustainable when it cushions people from the blows of everyday life and global crises. That's one big idea, I think, that's in it. And there's another big idea sitting in there, which I think arguably as work psychologists, we could say that very often we talk about individual jobs and so on, But the concept of sustainable livelihood is saying, look, you can't keep pretending that we're not connected to one another, that what I do in my work impacts on someone else. And what I consume in my life has been produced from a supply chain that involves work and wages and work conditions for so many different people. And it's not just in the shop in front of me now. And all, you know, when we saw in the middle of the pandemic, we saw supermarket shelf operators, stackers, bus drivers and so on getting spontaneous applause. That was recognition that people are connected through their livelihoods and that we all kind of depend on one another, and that many ways that people make their livelihoods don't actually get the amount of respect that they deserve for their contributions to a sustainable society. And, you know, this definition is also going further. It's saying it's about connections between generations. So it looks into the future, obviously, being about sustainability. And it looks at what we do in our livelihoods today affects what happens to people's livelihoods in the future. And it's urging us really to think in those globally interconnected terms across generations into the future of the species, but future of people that we love and so on. So it's very much a wide-ranging concept that many of our current definitions of work that focus on the job, the career, and so on, don't necessarily take full cognizance of, and that is gaining grounds possibly because of that in the environment that we live in now. As Veronica has mentioned, the threat from AI, but it's also opportunities, the climate crisis, which AI might help us to actually address more effectively, and so on. So we would argue that it's very much a concept that's for our time, and it's an ancient concept at the same time. Sam, next slide, please. Yeah. I say a few words about the United Nations. We've mentioned the SDGs and the ILO, the International Labour Organization. That's our global civil service for the world of work that we all service and work in ourselves. They have the Decent Work Agenda, as they call it, which is attached to SDG 8 in the 17 SDGs. That came about in 1999, and it talks about some things that few of us would disagree with today, you know. So it talks about ensuring fair incomes for people when they get out into the world of work. It talks about having a modicum of work security, and it talks about having a modicum of social protection. One could argue that that Decent Work Agenda, and it's something that drives the world of work and is set as a goal, is very laudable, but at the same time, it's a little bit minimal. It's a modicum of decent work conditions, and it might not actually go far enough for what we need in our current world environment. In other words, that the species, our species, could aim somewhat higher for the world of work. So if we think about the concept of sustainable livelihoods and say, you know, what do they add to that Decent Work Agenda, which was set down in 1999 before the pandemic, before many of the crises that we see today had reached the levels, of course, that they've reached today. So you can't be too critical of it, but we can ask whether it's maybe a little bit out of date and a little bit last century. So things like sustainable livelihoods obviously has a policy relevance with sustainability. And, you know, Sam put up that comment early on that students are worried about, they think about, they are concerned about sustainability. And for us as researchers, that means, of course, sustainability science. So we have to start thinking about ecosystemic issues and occupations and forms of livelihood. We have to think about forests and forestry. We have to think about landlords as a form of occupation that may not be a sustainable livelihood. We have to repurpose to start thinking about informal sector activities, some of which are heinous, others of which are just people trying to get by. So we can look at, we need to take much more seriously forms of livelihood like trafficking, poaching. People might need to do that to make the ends meet. And even when we take standard, you know, one-stop jobs like truck driving, there's a heck of a difference between driving a diesel truck and driving a green hydrogen truck. The same job, but radically different implications for sustainability. So it forces us to start rethinking and maybe breaking open some of the assumptions that we've had for many decades and have maybe served humanity well, but are running out of road, if I can use that image. Maybe it's more about motivation and hygiene. So hygiene conditions are things, as we know, that you need to do to keep yourself free of suffering and illness and bad things happening to you. Motivation is beyond that. Once you get that out of the way, you can start to focus on motivation and have higher aspirations. And I think when you read through the decent work agenda, things like minimum wages and so on, they look like necessary but not sufficient conditions. So sustainable livelihood is saying people want optimism, they want meaningful work, they want to see a future and a contribution to the future that their work is bringing. So we need to look at living wages more than bare minimum wages, which are often, one could argue subsistence or even below. There's a greater recognition, I think, in that broad house concept that, people don't go to work to get decent work conditions. They are looking for a livelihood, and the ways they can make that livelihood are often not just the one-stop shop full-time job that most people no longer have. We talk to our students, as I mentioned, they'll mention lots of different activities that they will be performing alongside one another, doing a part-time job here, some NGO work somewhere else, studying somewhere else, and so on. They have diverse livelihoods that have diverse elements in there, gig work, platform work, formal and informal, all mixed up. Some of them want to be influencers or YouTubers. None of these things appear, as we'll see, in many of the current classifications of work and jobs, and yet they're in the classroom when we meet. All of us meet our students, talk about these things. There's a scope in there for transfers and taxes. So, if jobs as we know them by human beings become scarcer and scarcer, we may have to end up in the countries that can afford it, at least, with a basic form of universal basic income and wealth taxes as well. And they can sit alongside and be part of the sustainable livelihood concept in a way that the job, the one-stop monocrop job cannot, perhaps. And lastly, very importantly, the concept starts to ask us, invites us, compels us to think about the connections between people, between generations, between people working in supply chains. If you see a $5 t-shirt from Bangladesh in the warehouse and it's really good quality cotton, really well stitched, yet you have to think, well, you can't deliver that for $5 and get it all across all the distance to here unless there's been fairly basic work conditions for those people to produce that t-shirt. So in the production and consumption of fair traded garments, sustainably made garments and traded garments and coffee and clean energy and so on. Next slide, please. So this broad house idea got Veronica and I thinking, okay, so going back to that, goal towards what can we actually bring to the table that might actually help as some sort of radical intervention or an element in it. And we've sort of come up with this idea, which it's still very early, so we're putting it out there, we're sharing it to discuss it and get your feedback on it and advice and insights. But we called it Project Clean Slate, so Sustainable Livelihoods and the Ecosystem. And slate mining, by the way, is we looked this up just to check. It's a very clean form of mining. It doesn't involve smashing up the reprocessing. Slate comes out close to the surface and it can be locally produced and locally used, very durable and so on. So it's the cleanest form of mining. So we had a bit of a few moment on that. But we thought, well, look, maybe we can start to think about having an annual New Zealand Sustainable Livelihood Index and the SLI index. And we put this into the MB Endeavour Fund just recently. So it's currently under consideration as a proposal, just a concept proposal, stage 1. We may or may not get through to stage 2, but it's to get some funding to get this thing going. And if we look around at the world of indexes, they're quite interesting. So if you look at Standard & Poor, the Fortune 500 and so on, they have a corporate sustainability assessment or CSA index. That's just, you have to be invited, but it's for corporations, but they can get themselves ranked and rated on this index, and they can be at the top, middle, or bottom. And it's prestigious for them to be at the top rather than at the bottom. The UN itself has the Human Development Index, the HDI, which ranks countries on their quality of living for the populations that they have on a whole range of indicators. Global Governance Index does a similar thing with respect to political corruption and other forms of corruption around the world. and then it produces this table, you know, top, middle, and bottom. Transparency International does that on human rights. ONET would be the closest thing perhaps in work psychology, our discipline, but ONET doesn't, it just classifies. It doesn't really say which are the better ones, the middle ones, and the worst ones. And that got us thinking to say, well, hold on a minute, we've got this massive world of work that's in flux and changing. Maybe we need a dynamic way of rethinking that, in which those forms of livelihood generation are ordered in some way, and so that young people leaving school might use it as a pointer, or people like yourselves might, in your professional services, might have them as a resource that you can use to help point young people, and people maybe losing their jobs, in older people losing their jobs or transitioning through climate quitting or whatever into another occupation. So we thought that might be a workable idea, and that might bring us round to let's say that nobody knows everything about this. If we're going to do it, we're going to have to talk to experts like yourselves, and we're going to have to do this as a team effort. So we thought we would try and pull together a team of global and national subject matter experts and advisors in this space of sustainable livelihoods. And that's really what, when we were invited today to speak to you today, that's what really brought us in. We thought we have to share this with you, see what you think about it, and you can help maybe guide us and preferably work together on it as we try and make it actually happen, or something like it happen. Thanks for your comment there, Sam. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we thought we'd better check nobody's actually done this. So we went to the existing Organisation of the World of Work, and you can pull us up on this if we've missed something, because you probably know it better than we do, right? But from where we're sitting, we see more classification than indication. So the world of work is carved up into different sectors and kinds of jobs you can have and so on. It's very nice in that sense, and it's organized, and there's lots of different ones and groupings of different types of work, but no indication of which ones are the more or less sustainable. There's no value judgment placed over the top of that. The existing classifications also look a bit outdated, so they look more analog than digital. So that, yeah, they don't talk about the internet all that much and influencing YouTubing and so on. Activity, not decency. So they describe the kind of work you have to do, but don't say whether it's decent or not, which is missing the whole point of the UN goals. And then there's another cluster of the ANSCO one. We've come across that one. Thanks, Sam. Yeah. There's another cluster of environmental indicators, and they're not indexes, they're classification schemes. But they don't really talk about the world of work, so they're off doing the environment stuff. And they're organizational, when they are into the environment, like the Corporate Sustainable Assessment, CSA one we mentioned, they're more about the organization's benefit than young people transitioning to work, or people losing their job looking to repurpose. So we thought we'd better keep minding the gap there. There is a gap, and we might have one around indexing sustainable livelihoods. Next slide, please, Sam. I'm conscious I'll have to speed up a bit because time's going quite quickly. So very, very briefly, what we thought we need to do, and these are the steps that we proposed to MB, we need to figure out what are the criteria that make for that sustainable livelihood. So we've got, Veronica's mentioned them already, and we've drawn them from the wider literature. Decent work obviously is a part of it. It's got to be environmentally protective, and it's got to bring some benefit to society. A lot of young people especially are looking for that in their future worlds of work. And we've got to be able to use why not use the SDGs themselves as partly as somehow as criteria to start evaluating these worlds of work. And of course, very important and fundamental, Mātauranga Māori, so Māori knowledge and wisdom must guide that process and outcome in our setting, which we are right now. And then once we've got that, we've got to then try and classify the world of work in a way that's modern and reflects the contemporary reality. This is going to be shifting all the time with AI and so on. So we're going to need to do it on a yearly basis. But we're going to have to take all the existing classification schemes and make one that fits the world of work as we see it right in front of us right now, and do that on a yearly basis. And then we can start to take those and use those criteria, put those two together. And if we can go to the The next slide, please, Sam. Once we put those together, we can score them up in the way that you do indexing and start to rank order livelihood activities, maybe not jobs, because they're a one-stop shop that may actually be in the process of disappearing. But livelihood activities certainly by their sustainability across decent work conditions, environmentally protective, and bringing the social good. We're not going to be able to probably do all of them. There'll be too many. So we're thinking, if we think about an index like the university rankings of universities around the world, most people will go to the top 20 and the bottom 20. You don't want to be in the bottom 20 and you want to be in the top 20. So we think we're probably going to do something like that and try and get the top 20 or so out, and the ones that need to be named and shamed at the other end. And that may actually incentivize them in the end through this index to start changing their practices or regulating them. And the top, of course, will be benefiting from the index. Next slide, please, Sam. Yeah, there are some existing sustainable livelihood indexes by name. They draw from Peter Townsend's work on poverty in the UK in 1979, but they really look at the sorts of things that households have. It's mainly rural household, rural regions and national regions, the sorts of resources they have for sustainability of their livelihoods rather than how they get sustainability through their livelihoods, if that makes sense. And so we think that yawning gap still exists concerning sustainable livelihoods. Oh, next slide, please, Sam. Yeah, I'm whistling through now, but the incentivized bit. So if we identify them, we index, and we think the index might work as a bit of an incentivizer for change. This is the radical intervention bit. So in systems thinking, which we talked about earlier and Veronica talked about, if we think about the systems dynamic of success to the successful, or in this case, success to the sustainable, you know, those universities, for example, as I mentioned at the top of the index, will get more resources from government, more students coming through the door. They'll get more and more successful because they're already up there. Those at the bottom will wax and will wane rather than wax. Top waxes, bottom wanes. They'll lose sustainability and hopefully disappear or improve their act to climb up that table. So that if we do this thing, the top of the livelihoods at the top, which are identified as sustainable, will draw more people in and draw more critical resources and grow, and that will become the nature of change that we seek in the world. So if we, on the top left, we've got our job seeker looking through, might use this index as a way to help them guide, not the only thing, of course, but help them to guide their decision making where they can do what they want to do. And we know a lot of it's around sustainability and sustainability of their livelihood as well as the environment and society. Yourselves as career counsellors, careers advisors, professionals in the vocational space might be able to use that tool as part of your extensive range of services and expertise, if it's helpful. On the bottom left, we've got investors might decide to put more investment into the top of the table, not the bottom, which will grow more successful, sustainable livelihoods as a virtuous circle. And the government workforce on the right, we've got governments deciding about where to invest in workforce development. They might pitch for the top of the table as well. And the consumer as well might, and this is the most recent edition of our thinking, they might actually start to shop into that space as well and buy products from and services from that part of the table. So all of this could actually help to incentivize and hopefully change in a good way how the world of work delivers what it can. We know it can deliver. Next slide, please, Sam. So I think that's where we want to stop because we're still at the prototype stage. I've got some readings up there. Folks want to have a look at them. You know, Veronica's article in the Australian Journal of Career Development just out, Anna Maria's paper with Mari in 2016, and a collection of chapters that we've recently edited for Routledge, 22 chapters from all around the world on tackling precarious work, which we know is a scourge for all people these days in the world of work. It's so widespread, it's unreal, and nudging towards sustainable livelihoods. But the main thing we want to do is just now stop and ask you for your reaction, your questions, your advice and your feedback. Thank you so much, Kia ora koutou, for having us along. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. That was a really interesting. And I'm just going to put a question in the chat. I was wondering whether you're going to be talking to TEC about their new Taha 2, which is the new website, which is replacing Careers New Zealand, the Careers New Zealand website. They're going to be going through and classifying a number of jobs. I can't remember. Leslie, you were at the conference. Were you at the CDANZ conference? No, you weren't. Oh, blast. I've got the feeling they're doing something like releasing the first 100 roles, and they're aiming to have about 600 on the website in the next year, something like that. I might have the numbers of hundreds wrong, but I'm just wondering whether there's some, whether some of that work may be done. Sorry.
Sam, is that what Lynette Reid's doing?
Possibly. I'm not sure.
Dr. Lynette Reid has just been appointed as the quality quality something or other from TEC, for TEC. Look, I've got my brain going now. And she's so she's I think she's involved in that project actually. And I'll just find out exactly what that was.
Thank you, because this is precisely why we need to be doing what we're doing right now, because the only way it's going to happen is we're all talking to one another, figuring out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Tertiary Education Commission is redoing the Careers New Zealand website, and on that there's been a number of roles. I can't remember how many of them there are on there, but that's been the New Zealand version of the ANZCO occupations, because the ANZCO occupations haven't been properly rewritten since about 2001, and that was a pretty minor update that happened then. So I think that was 2013 was the last revision, and so they're currently 10 years out of date. And if you think about how much technology shifted in 10 years, it's madness. And all the ACC decisions are made on that. So you get, you know, people that are going back to work and they're saying, oh, you could be a sales assistant when they can't keyboard or never used an app in their life. It's like, well, that's really not going to work very well. But anyway.
No, and next year it will be different again. And
that's right.
An annual thing. It's not going to be decades before. You know, next year the whole world will look different. The world of work will be different again, and it's accelerating. So the sustainability issue becomes central for young anyone. Why would you point someone at? You guys are at the front line, so you're dealing with this all the time. How can you point somebody at something you don't know if it's going to be there when they get there? You know. And what it might look like, and there isn't really a systematic way of gauging how much it delivers in terms of all the things that people are wanting now. You know, the classifications are really important, or reclassification, but that layer of, okay, so what's the good oil, if I can use that word? And what's the less good? Where's the rotten stuff, and where's the stuff that you're looking for?
Yeah, it's good.
I've just found the Dr. Lynette Reid reference, and it's it says that here there was an announcement that TEC is delighted that Dr. Lynette Reid, renowned career specialist and senior lecturer, has been appointed as the National Career Systems Strategy Action Plan determining quality criteria. Her research is mainly in about schools and transitioning from school to work. But it's determining criteria for quality career education, information, advice, and guidance. And it's this the CEIAG project. So I'll put that in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great.
So much.
I can paste that.
Veronica, our plan is really, I mean, we're hoping we can keep you guys on board and work with you going forward with this, because we can't really do it without you. I mean, that's honest, right? And we've already just, you pointed us at some. The plan is that we do this over a 2-year cycle, and that we do it through conversations like this one, if we're going to try and make something together, it has to be, you have to tell us what might be useful from your end of things, so that when it does get made, you can use it. You know, it's not going to be, and it'll be made with your expertise going into it. All of us have to bring something to the table, so that's the plan.
It's an excellent plan. I was wondering about how much is misinformation, or how are you going to deal with filtering out misinformation? I mean, for example, my husband and I built a house. We've got photovoltaics on the roof. It's been a long plan of trying to live more sustainable lives, and we've just bought an electric vehicle, so that's part of the long-term plan. And people keep saying, oh, you can't, buying an electric vehicle is incredibly wasteful on the planet, and you know, all the lithium mines and drama. And yes, we know lithium batteries go into electric vehicles currently, and we're also using lithium and other batteries and everything else. It's not just cars, but there still is a saving in carbon. It's not ideal. It would probably be much better to have a horse, but that's not entirely feasible in the current world of work. But still, how are you going to be able to factor or combat misinformation in what you put forward?
I think in terms of the rating, in terms of the lithium batteries, would be lithium mining, right? Would be the job. So if we look at decent work, it would be, so are people paid good conditions? Is it secure employment? Is it safe? So there would be some sort of, in that criteria, there would be some sort of ranking there. The second one would be, is it highly extractive? Is it environmentally? And then in the third thing, the social benefit is, what's the benefit to society? So you could potentially kind of get a good score in 2 out of 3, and then that would kind of affect your overall score. So I think that would be how we would manage ranking or rating that particular activity. In terms of misinformation, are you talking about people sort of saying, actually, there's no point in having electric cars because they're just as problematic as, and that's kind of, I guess, another complete sort of separate issue to how we would look at ranking that type of work. I mean, it's really hard to know, and I don't think anybody really knows how to effectively deal with misinformation. Pre-bunking inoculation seems to be a really good way to kind of do that. So I guess if you were looking at trying to join what we're doing up with that sort of thing, you might be able to argue that there are some problems with it, or potentially do some comparisons, although fact checking is not always so effective either. So I think that's really kind of difficult, and I'm not sure that we've necessarily sort of thought about stepping into that thing. I guess what we're sort of concerned is this updating the world of work, which obviously people are starting to do in New Zealand, but more in sort of determining the sustainable livelihood through these 3 criteria. And we're kind of okay on the decent work one of it. We're a little bit, there's a lot of standards around carbon footprint. So there's sort of some stuff there, but the social benefit, and we've sort of put together our national partners, so the Stu and I, and on the actual research team, and the other half of our team are Māori. So we've sort of, and because the Māori economy contributes enormously and also has a lot of greenhouse emissions, because there's a lot of activity in tourism and in farming. So yeah, I think, and our international teams are based in the US and in Europe. So I think we would probably look at what they were doing in those spaces as well and try and get as much sort of information. They're kind of, Anna Maria has been doing a lot of stuff in sustainability science for quite a long time. But again, really open to anybody's ideas on how to do that. I think, you know, New Zealand's really grappling with how to deal with misinformation, disinformation. It's something that has always been here, but certainly got amplified through COVID-19, and we saw it kind of really the outcome of it on the in the Freedom Camp in Parliament. So yeah, there's a lot of work being done in that space, but I'm not sure anybody's really got some really great answers on how to deal with that.
But what we have done, as Veronica said, we've got an international team, 16, they're sustainability scientists, work scientists, who will be tasked, they are our consulting sort of tentacles out, that we're bringing them on board in the same way that we have conversations, so that if there is misinformation and it doesn't find its way into our process for rank ordering these livelihood activities on sustainability. And we're only using the world's best, which is, you know, the ones that are out there that have already been developed through extensive global consultation, like the SDGs and so on, which you can boil down to those three main dimensions. And then we'll be fact checking. You know, there'll be a huge amount of fact checking that goes on about lithium and so on. So we're kind of baking as much of that in as we can to the process. All these indexes depend on expertise. Subject matter expertise is the foundation for a good index, and that's why we're here today, to meet you guys. It's why we've been talking internationally, and we're hoping we can continue that process as we go through this 2-year cycle to get one of these things kind of prototype built in the next 2 years.
That's great. Thanks very much. I know they're really difficult things. They're so complex, but it's I like the idea of the 3 levels that you end up with, basically an overall rating for each thing. I think that gives you quite a bit of flexibility. So it'd be really interesting to see how it plays out. Someone else ought to ask a question. I'm asking too many.
Oh, I have a question. Kia ora. I know that each year there are some Sustainable Business Awards that are given out here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and there's a Sustainable Business Network, I think. And I'm just wondering whether you're linking sort of to, you know, at that level with the efforts that are trying to be made, you know, from a business perspective and the world of work. Again, and how, you know, what criteria they use, and how what judgments they're making on what is sustainable and who gets these awards and why. Absolutely.
If I can answer, Veronica, if that's all right. I absolutely, yes. And again, you know, we will reach out to that network. There's no point in somebody going off and trying to develop something that doesn't fit with what other people are doing. And you know, I guess as well, it's what they mean by Sustainable Business Network, whose interests they are looking after. So at the moment, if you look around at the various activities that are happening, everybody's doing their thing. So the CSR people are off doing something important. The consumer associations are doing something else. The environmental groups are doing something else. I think that the essence of this process is systems. Again, it's trying to join the dots. So, you know, Sarah, you mentioning that network to us, which I think we've come across, but we will definitely reach out to them. And that's the way that the integration can only happen. Otherwise, everything's all fragmented and it doesn't get joined up. But then in reality, if a kid's leaving school, they want something joined up. They want to look at it and say, what's going to deliver? I want to do A, B, and C. I want to make a difference. I want the environment not to be harmed by me going to work, or to lose my job because the environment stops me growing the fruit trees or whatever. You know, so they want something that manages to distill all of that and come up with a fairly trustworthy, expertise-based, non-biased assessment of where those most sustainable livelihood activity options are located, and that then there's the whole job of, which is where you guys come in as well as at that stage, but advising them how they get into that space, which is, there's a huge amount of uncertainty. I mean, if you talk to young people, they're all uncertain about the future. The more we can reduce the uncertainty in a way that integrates all that we know, the better it will be for them and for us.
Good. Leslie here.
Yeah,
I do think that it would be with you while speaking with Lynette Reid, because I heard her project last night on a Zoom meeting. She's using the systems method. She's used the micro, meso, and macro systems of Bronford and Brenner, I think.
It's a hard work.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, a conversation with her would be really worthwhile, because you're both really going down the same track. And she did both quantitative and qualitative research, but quite a small group of schools. But yeah, I think it would be interesting for you to talk.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really helpful, Leslie. And again, you know, that's exactly why we're here and what we were hoping to do while we're here. So thank you. Those conversations are, I mean, the SDGs behind me on the screen, SDG 17 is partnerships for the goals. And what you're really talking about is, we're all talking about, is this idea of partnerships, whether it's between us and you guys or with Lynette or whatever. It's you need to have those partnerships in place before you get going, rather than after you've started off going. But we're in that space, and appreciate the heads up. Yeah. And
it looks like she's at AUT, is that right?
Yes, she certainly was. I'm not, I can't tell you whether she still is there or not, but she's mainly research based.
Perfect. Well, it's nice. She's in our city, so yay.
Yeah, she's no longer, she is in Auckland. She's no longer at AUT. She was working, she resigned from there last year, and now she's just got this job at TEC.
Perfect. That's great. Yeah, no, she sounds fantastic. Especially with all that kind of updating the world of work too, that sort of needs to happen.
The other person that I wasn't present at the CDANZ conference, but Toomey was speaking from an international point of view, and I know that he spoke with both the Auckland Chamber of Commerce and also TEC, and that's really looking at the overview of career strategy for New Zealand. And CDANZ would be able to help you with those conversations, I think.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's great. Wonderful.
I will, if you haven't seen the program from the CDANZ conference, I'll email it through.
Oh, thank you. That would be fantastic.
Because that's got, I think, a few contact details on it too. So yeah, Tristram. Yeah.
And getting in touch with the main CDANZ, I think getting in touch with who's president of CDANZ now?
I've gone completely blank.
Chris, but Chris, who's the general manager, that might be, it might be worth getting in touch with the, I don't know if you've got their details, but I think that's another useful contact.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. Yep, I'll get Chris's email.
Oh, thank you so much, Sam. That's fantastic.
No worries.
Really cool.
It's all good. Just wondering whether there's anything else that I can think of off the top of my head at the moment. Nothing, I don't think, from me. What about you, Kay? Have you got
nothing to say? Sorry.
It's all good.
I've just got a general question, if that's, oh, sorry, Leslie. Do you want to go?
I was just thinking, somewhere in the back of my mind, the Australian transferable skills clusters are coming forward for me. And I think that they were set up, weren't they, just yeah, to try and transfer skills from one area to another area. And I don't know if they have done any work in the sustainable area, but that might be another thing that's worthwhile looking at.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
It could also be worth talking to Seeker, if you're familiar with Seeker in Australia.
Yeah. I gave a talk to Seeker earlier the start of this year, actually. They were a great group to meet, really nice. And like yourselves, they're just really, supportive, but offered loads of pointers and things like that. So we've met them, and I'm very glad to see you guys too.
I did actually attend a webinar a couple of years ago now from a Canadian researcher. I think her last name was Lengela, but I've got the feeling that she might have been Dutch. And I remember that she talked about the number of vague roles versus specific roles, and she got that data from her husband, who had been doing some research for the Dutch government. And I tried to actually get a hold of the report through a friend of mine who was Dutch, who approached the Dutch government, but he was unable to find anybody who could come up with the report. But you guys may have wider resources or networks. I will get the name of the researcher and I'll send it to you. And that might end up in a dead end, but it's probably something else to perhaps pursue, because if the Dutch government have done something where they've looked at the changing roles, it could well be, even if it just provides some directional papers or who knows what. Yeah. I'll see what I can find.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Raywyn, you were going to speak. Sorry, before I interrupted.
No, that's all right. I just had a general question, because I was just thinking about when you started talking, Veronica, you were talking about the deregulation and or New Zealand versus international regulations and deregulation, and just thinking about I was just thinking about what would there be enough, since we now have a minister for deregulation, and is there enough international pressure for sustainability to influence the way the New Zealand government is going in this way, do you think? Because I can see that things are getting spiraling out of control here rapidly, and with regard to some deregulation, that is there enough international pressure to keep us on the track of sustainability?
I'm not an expert in this area, but from what I understand, the European Union have really cohesive standards, and they've all agreed to kind of the Paris Agreement and to reducing emissions, and that includes goods and services that come through supply chains, that they've got to be mapped as they come through and given kind of codes or measurements. So I did see, and like I said, I don't know, but I did see, and I don't know who it was, but recently somebody said that if we veer off the way that we're going, our free trade with agreement, which is supposed to come into effect either next year or the year after, I forget which one, will be jeopardized if we don't commit and keep on the path to the goals that we have agreed to. So definitely, so will be interesting to see whether we feel that the European Union is a really important trading partner that we do want to keep, and how we will manage doing that if we don't keep to the sustainability objectives that partner needs from people that trade with them.
Yeah, no, that's good point. And I didn't expect you to have a definitive answer. It's just focusing. That's something I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
I think the incentivization bit is perhaps the most important bit of an index is just an index at the end of the day. but we had government on, right, as Veronica was saying, we've got a government down there as, you know, looking at this index and becoming incentivized by it, as well as, you know, supporting it, hopefully. The other thing is that we're hoping to be part of developing indexes for other areas of the world. So, you know, New Zealand becomes a bit of a leader in that space. What was that phrase, Veronica? First something advantage.
Oh, the first mover advantage and the force multiplier. That's your phrase.
And a force multiplier to incentivize others.
Sounds good.
Put pressure back on New Zealand. So we might get some more international pressure that way. It's a little bit cheeky, but I think you have to be in these times, try and do something that's going to, you know, poke the system at some time and upset the system. You know, in reality, there are lots of things that are misinformation. They're presented as sustainable, but they're not actually. And New Zealand's got a few things. All countries got stuff to deal with, and we may make some, and we will make some enemies with this process. But I think it's about calling out and pointing to the better prospects for the future, not the ones that are being touted as them. So we can try and get away from touting.
Gosh, wouldn't that be nice?
No.
I'm very conscious that we've gone 10 minutes over, and so perhaps we should finish there. And if anybody's got any further things or ideas that they have to share, or they suddenly think, oh no, why didn't I mention? Please feel free to email me and I'll funnel it through to you guys. Thank you. Email Raywin. And we'll make sure you get that. And it would be really interesting to catch up at some point in the future and hear how this went. So it would be great to hear. And I can say as well that the Tackling Precarious workbook is really interesting. I've ordered a copy for our library and I've got a copy. I'd have to say I'm slowly reading it. I'm not speeding through it. I've been marking quite a lot, so I'm trying to keep my reading minimal, but I've cleared the decks, and so it's going to be it's a kind of difficult conversation to have in some ways, isn't it? Especially when you read things and you think, wow, we do that. Oh, that's really not good. How do you solve that? They're wicked problems, aren't they? Wicked problems that we're trying to tackle. Yeah, but good book, by the way.
Well, they bring us together because we share that touchstone that we put up at the. So that touchstone is still there, and Veronica and I talked about it before. We would like to ask you guys if you would stay in this more than catch up at some point, but actually be a key association, key experts in the conversation going forward, so that if we get the startup funding, we come back. Several times we have meetings like this where we share what we know and how we can help each other. It would be really cool.
Well, I'd be very keen.
Yeah,
perfect.
Definitely.
Awesome. Okay. Sorry, any other questions? Or
I do have one last question, because I'm thinking about the generation of young people that we're talking about, and how are you connecting with, you know, with that younger generation, even at this early stage? Is there anything happening, you know, with groups of young people?
Well, the international team has some young folks on there, you know, won awards for youth activism and so on. Certainly. And again, we're still in the process. We're still just getting going, really. But that would be absolutely vital. I mean, we've got a lot of young students in our classrooms. We always start every course by talking with them about where they want to go, where they think they're going, what we need to do. You'll do exactly the same as we do, yeah? You sit down with them and you listen first before you talk. And so that's the plan. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks.
Right.
Thank you.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, I think we should close. We've used an extra 15 minutes of your time, and for which we're very grateful, but it's been very interesting. Everyone, I'll send the slides out afterwards, and I'll make a list of things to come back to you guys too. And I've made some notes with my pencil, very old school, and I'll send some materials through probably tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you. So I'll just close very briefly. I'm learning a new closing karakia, so I'm practicing on you. It's excellent. Right, where am I? One moment, caller. I shouldn't say that. It's a terrible thing to say, sorry. Okay. Kai whakaria te tapu, ka wātea ai te tara. Kia turu ki whakataha ai, kia turu ki whakataha ai, hui taiki e. And I shall translate. Our barriers have been moved away. Our pathways are now clear to return to our everyday activities. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. A very small but select and excellent group. And I will share the recording and everything else with you tomorrow. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ka kite.
Lovely to meet you. Ka kite.